Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Public Sector Catering webinar. Today's subject is hot school meals and when is it time to turn up the heat and start making sure we get hot meals served. Our panel today consists of representation from across the four nations. We have Stephen Briggs from Northern Ireland, Stephen Forster from LACA and England, Judith Gregory representing Wales, and Jayne Jones from Assist FM in Scotland. Before we start the webinar, I have a short video to show you. Over to you, David. David, you're on mute.
I'll start that again. Good morning, everyone. I'm David Fode, editor of Public Sector Catering magazine, and thank you for joining us for the latest in our Public Sector Catering webinar series. Today we're going to be talking about hot meals in schools and asking in the best tabloid tradition, is it time to turn up the heat? And that's because while many school caterers have continued to serve hot meals to vulnerable pupils and the children of key workers during the latest lockdown, others have stopped them. The figures show that after the first lockdown last summer, a full hot meal service took months to return and was still only at an estimated 80 to 85% by Christmas. This is important because the benefits to children's attainment, physical development and behaviour through tasty and nutritious food are widely acknowledged, as is the belief that the best way of delivering that is through a hot lunchtime meal. Before we meet our panel for today, a quick reminder about how the webinar will work. Other than the panelists and me, everyone will be muted. If you want to get in touch during the webinar, you can put a question to the panelists using the Q&A function. Please include your name and your company, and we'd like you to keep this to questions rather than comments or statements. You don't have to wait until we start taking questions. You can put a question at any time to us. The other way to get involved is to share a comment with everyone using the chat function, remembering to choose the option to all panelists and attendees. We won't unfortunately be able to answer any questions put to us in the chat. We're lucky today to be joined by school meals representatives from the 4 UK home nations. They will be fielding a few questions from me to start off with, before we open the floor to questions from our webinar participants, you. So let's meet them now. First, we have Judith Gregory, Regional Chair of LACA in Wales. Good morning, Judith.
Morning, everyone.
Okay. Next, we have Stephen Briggs, Head of Service Catering at the Education Authority of Northern Ireland. Good morning, Stephen.
Morning.
Then we have Jayne Jones, Chair of Assist FM in Scotland. Hello, Jayne.
Morning, David. Morning, everyone.
And we're also joined by Stephen Forster, National Chair of LACA, who's representing England. Good morning, Stephen.
Good morning, David, and good morning, everyone.
Okay. I guess it's time now really to get on with the questions. And first up, I wanted to talk about restarting school meals after the break. And I want to know from our participants today what they expect from the school services initially as schools go back to full-time opening and start to deliver a fuller meal service. Perhaps we can start with you, Jayne.
Yeah, David, I just want to be really clear with everyone here today, and I think most of the people in this webinar understand this already, but many schools haven't been closed. So this is more about a re-engaging and ramping up our existing services. But there seems to be a bit of a perception out there that school buildings have just been closed and school hatches have been down since December, and that is far from the truth. So we've continued to operate serving meals throughout this winter term for children of key workers and for those who are most vulnerable. And that's been a significantly higher amount of meals than there were during lockdown 1 way back this time last year. So we certainly can't characterise it as a closure. In Scotland, our primary 1 to 3 pupils and our early years pupils returned over 2 weeks ago. And we actually had a number of our very small schools and very small settings all go back at that time too. So we've already been working through some of the kinks and services as we've reverted back as best we can to what was working before Christmas, ultimately, which was trying to offer as close to a normal service as we can. So we've got the remaining primary school classes coming back to school this coming Monday, and we are looking forward to seeing them. In our secondary schools, it's been a little different. Pupils on site there have had to maintain social distancing, and they're only in for specific sessions. So we're definitely further away from back to normal there, but we are still up and running and operating with pre-ordering, grab and go, and doing what we can to get meals to those who need and want them most. For those pupils in Scotland, though, who remain at home and aren't back yet and are entitled to free school meals, they are still, in most cases in Scotland, receiving cash payments. Some are doing vouchers, some are doing food parcels, but that will continue. And with us almost being at the Easter holidays now, that will continue through that holiday period. And we're looking forward to getting back full-time properly come Easter.
Excellent, thank you. Stephen Briggs, perhaps I can bring you in at this point. Is it the case in Northern Ireland that it's really just a ramping up of a service that's just been operating at a lower level?
So good morning, everyone, from Belfast. So we've been a little different on what we have had to deliver. Our schools all started back at the beginning of September, and we first started off the service by doing a packed lunch service to all students. And then we worked after the first 2 weeks of that, we noticed the numbers starting to drop where children were bringing their own packed lunches rather than taking ours, which we thought would have happened anyway. And then we gently, and I emphasize the word gently, started to move schools towards a more substantial meal that we would have done pre-COVID. So by December 18th, we had moved 99% of all post-primary to a hot meal option, and 98% of primary schools had moved to a hot meal option. And I think the question was directed is how will you return whenever your students go back to school? Our P1 to P3 only started back to school on Monday. and we're waiting on a decision later this afternoon. All of the schools were meant to return on the 12th of April, but it looks as if there may be a change there to bring them back earlier. But we are absolutely intending to go back to the service that we left in December, to go back to that meal, or the temperature of the meal being hot. But we are, as you know, Jayne had said there, we're delivering meals in a totally different way, and it's very much around the bubbles and the school principal and what way they want the meals delivered. So in primary schools, the majority of ours are getting the meals delivered in to the classroom, and in post-primary, they are a wee bit more flexible in their timetables and opening the canteen, but we also have to deliver for years 8 to 10. But we would not be intending to move back to a packed lunch service whenever they return.
Okay, thank you. Judith, tell us a little bit about what's happening in Wales. I'm assuming that schools started to reopen on March the 8th, or is that wrong?
No, well, similar to Jayne and Stephen, actually. Our foundation phase pupils returned on the 22nd of February, and then our key stage 2 and years 10, 11, 12 and 13 are going to have a phased return from Monday the 15th of March. The younger age groups in secondary schools are having what they call a call-in and catch-up session for the last 2 weeks of this term. So depending on all the data, if all the data is correct, our schools will be looking to fully return to all pupils on the 12th of April. But as Jayne has already said, you know, that we have continued to provide a meal service throughout all of the school closure period to the children who are vulnerable and key workers children. So once the schools start to return after Easter, if that is confirmed, because we're expecting an announcement from the First Minister tomorrow to confirm whether that is actually going to happen, there is going to be a phased return in terms of, you know, ramping up the school meals service, and there will be a mixture of, you know, some schools may not have a full catering service right at the very beginning, so those free school meal pupils in those schools would continue to receive vouchers or direct payments, and then obviously there will be schools that are doing cold food, and there will be some that are doing hot food. The problem is, of course, is that, you know, in the early parts of the opening up of schools, is that you really don't know how many pupils you're actually going to be catering for at that time, and that obviously, you know, causes some other issues as well.
Okay, thank you. Stephen Forster, is that an issue that your members face as schools reopen, just not knowing the numbers?
I think so, David. But first of all, just can I start by saying thank you to all our school caterers and our supply chain as well, who have done a fantastic job these past months. In fact, for almost a year now, where we've had such uncertainty around our provision and around sort of what's expected of us as service providers. Everyone has really sort of stepped up and done a brilliant job, and I'm sure that sort of, yeah, we have some blips and we have some sort of challenges and issues that go wrong, but that's the world that we're in. We have those challenges and issues every day, but fortunately, you know, sort of they're not always, you know, sort of the big news items. But I did want to just congratulate everyone. In terms of sort of England, indications are that primary schools are pretty much back and are working, albeit that social distancing and working in bubbles has changed the face of what we're doing. But, you know, you've got examples of where we're doing classroom dining. We've got examples as to where children are coming in sort of their bubble into the dining room and picking up their plates or trays and taking it back and eating in their classrooms. So there's various models happening there. I think we've seen a slower return in secondaries because, of course, in secondary schools, we've got this 3 consecutive negative flow tests that students have to do. So it's been a little bit sort of stop-start there in terms of that some schools have started the flow tests in the last fortnight, which means that we've got, pretty much full schools in secondaries. Other schools have just started the flow tests this week, and therefore we're seeing a more gradual sort of phased return in terms of the secondary schools. As far as service is concerned, all indications are that sort of we're getting there with volumes. They're not quite where any of us would want them to be, but that's probably to be expected. So yeah, I think we should be very proud of what we've done as an industry to respond to this for the last year.
All right, thank you very much. Stephen Briggs now, you mentioned that Northern Ireland, you were, in terms of hot meals, up to sort of 90+% by about December the 18th. What are the challenges for you and your members in terms of getting back to that sort of figure now?
I think is this moving on to question 2? Sorry.
Yes.
Yes, it is, right. Okay, so we have now been closed for nearly 3 months. When we did, by the 18th of December, we were providing the hot meal service. Our paying pupils had dropped by 26%. Our free school meals, surprisingly, had also dropped by 12% as well. I think some of the problems, facing our catering whenever we go back is that some schools have actually liked the classroom service, and especially within the special school settings, behavioural things with children and all the rest. The children enjoy getting the food sent to the classroom, and we are getting a lot of requests, and especially from primary schools, would it be possible to continue this going forward into the future? We obviously haven't answered that one yet. We need to look at it. But also, children that would have taken school meals that reverted to packed lunch, they may wish to keep to this arrangement. And we also need to remember that parents have not been paying the money for school lunches. And if you have 2 or 3 children going to school, it's actually about £145 a month that you're not paying out for school meals. The direct payment, which we have carried out here in Northern Ireland as well, has been extremely popular with those parents as well. And I know that whenever we do open the schools, and we have this week, moving parents off the direct payment onto the free school meal has been a difficult enough process. Listening to comments coming back from parents regarding that. Post-primary again, if we're not supplying the product in there that the children have been getting from September to December, we have noticed quite a lot of them heading out through the school gate, and that may prove popular going forward as well. But one thing that we do acknowledge, and it's something that we are working on, is that we absolutely need a campaign to encourage pupils to return, and we also need to set out the benefits of the school meal service for both pupil and parent. One thing which I have noticed as well is a loss of experience within our school meals. I know from my own experience here that there's maybe a lot of catering managers out there that maybe were hoping to leave the service in 2 or 3 years' time, have now taken the decision that they will not be returning and they're leaving us early. So we have also got that mountain to climb as well to try and fill that void in the experience of running school meals. So there's a number of issues there, and it goes from customer right to us who's meant to be delivering the meals.
Right, thank you. Judith, what are the challenges you see in Wales in getting back up to a full meal service again?
I think in Wales, there's since the schools have started to return, as I say, in February, there's been a real emphasis on reducing the size of the bubbles of children, obviously to reduce the risk of transmission, and therefore, less pupils needing to isolate if there's a positive case. But this has got implications for the service delivery. It needs then more lunch time sit-ins, we need alternative dining areas, longer lunch times, there's increase in staffing hours and therefore increased costs. So I think that those are sort of the main challenges that we're facing at the moment. But I just wanted to mention, in terms of Stephen Briggs's comment about children liking eating in their classrooms, for quite a while, we've had foundation phase children complaining that dining areas in, large dining hall is too noisy. And that this is something now that the children are actually saying themselves that they like eating in the classrooms. Maybe, this is something we should look at in the future in terms of alternative areas to support the younger children.
Interesting there. Stephen Forster now. What's the picture in England, Stephen?
Well, I think once again, this last lockdown has been very different for us in terms of that we've seen probably much higher volumes of children attending school throughout this. And it feels like we've seen sort of up to around 30% of children being in school or needing some kind of provision throughout this sort of last sort of period since the return to school that wasn't in January. I think that we've had better notice of the return, certainly in England, that, so it was very clear that all schools would be back on the 8th of March. And therefore that gave us a fortnight to be able to get provisions in and be able to start and ramp up. I think the short-term challenge beyond service lies around some staff shortages that we're starting to see, either with staffing, and again, Stephen, your point in Northern Ireland about people that are choosing maybe not to come back and so on, but the short-term challenge on staff who are either isolating themselves or are shielding and therefore unable to come back into work. But I would see that as being short-term challenge, and that, sort of while volumes are not at their full capacity, it feels as though we're able to sort of match off against that and have some flexibility and the agility of working in sort of a group contract allows us to move people around to fill the gaps, if you like. So that potentially has been really helpful.
All right, thank you. And Jayne, what are the challenges in Scotland for sort of ramping back up to a full hot meal service?
A lot of the similar issues that we've heard from other parts of the UK, because we haven't had that big bang return overnight and it's been a phase back, that's been particularly helpful for our pupils, for our schools and for our catering services. So we've been able to bring staff back gradually, as Judith said, in bubbles, because some of that has had to change as a result of some of the changes for pupils. That has given us some time to work through individual issues and concerns and do things like individual risk assessments for those staff groups who need them. We need to be really mindful, as Stephen said earlier, of how flexible and supportive our staff have been through this. We really couldn't have done any of this without their dedication. They're the ones doing the hard work, not us sitting up here. One of the biggest challenges for us, and I think across the UK, but in Scotland it's perhaps been more pertinent, has been the impact on our supply chain. No one expected schools to close in January, and that came out of the blue. That was obviously a bit of a double blow, because suppliers have been working hard for us to try and create backup stock in case we needed it with the EU exit. And then in Scotland, because we have significant changes to our menus coming into effect in 4 weeks' time, we have very little time now to help the supply chain work through some of that stock. So that has been a really important factor for us, that we've been able to phase some of that in, but we don't want our suppliers to be left high and dry with short-dated stock yet again. So it's an unintended consequence we all have to try and work together to resolve. We've learned so much though about what that return to schools looked like last August. This time round we weren't necessarily reinventing things. We've been able to take the lessons learned and build them in. Just one final point, Stephen had mentioned about secondary school pupils leaving school grounds. That continues to be a concern and an issue. The guidance in Scotland around school meals has helped somewhat, where it's now quite clear in that guidance to schools that they have a duty to encourage school meals uptake and to make sure that people who are entitled to free school meals are accessing them and taking them. So this has to be that partnership approach, and it shouldn't be left just to caterers to do this. But our guidance is very clear and very supportive on that, and puts some of that onus on our schools to make sure that we work in partnership to engage as many children as we can.
All right, thank you. I wanted to move the conversation on a little bit now, perhaps a sort of a step further, because the real focus is getting a return to a hot meals service. And I wonder at what point you feel it would be unacceptable for a school not to provide hot meals, bearing in mind, you know, the various circumstances and the phased nature of schools reopening. Judith, can I turn to you first for some views on that?
I don't think you're actually able to say a particular time or point that this would apply. I think what is really important is that caterers work closely with the schools concerned, to facilitate their return. Quite often, you just need to take small steps to get to that point, and showcase other schools to reassure head teachers, because head teachers have been through an awful lot, haven't they, as we all have, since March last year, and we've really got to work with them to alleviate their concerns and not put pressure on them, because at the end of the day, we are there to support them and to find a solution.
All right, thank you. Stephen Briggs, if I could bring you in on this. We obviously agree that the aim would be ideally to have a sort of full hot meal service. Some schools might struggle to provide that. What's the sort of the best way of arriving at the point where you get as many as you possibly can delivering that sort of service?
Yeah, so some of the barriers to getting the hot meal service in at the very beginning, and still remains the same now, is what space is available in each of the schools. We will have schools with maybe 2 or 3 sports halls and a canteen, and they're able to divide them out. And we have had capital investment given to us to set those up, that they're mobile counters and things like that. So we've been able to do that. But there's still quite a lot of schools that have got a small canteen and classrooms with no sports facilities at all, except for outside. But I think for us as well, it is very much principal led. The principal is the decision maker of the school, whether or not there's going to be what type of service they want for school meals. And a lot of principals have had to use the packed lunch service because it is easier managed. And also, when you are delivering hot meals in a classroom, they could be short of supervision, which is another big thing for the principals, to get the lunch hours covered. But for us here, I believe we will continue with the current setup until the end of the summer. It'll be a mixed bag. It's the parents' priority really at this stage. Schools are closed 3 months or more. Parents' priority at the moment here is the education of the children. It hasn't been a major problem if we're providing a packed lunch and parents are complaining about it. It hasn't been that. It is very much about getting their children educated. So parents have been flexible and have borne with us through this process. I suppose going into the summer as well, maybe if we do get a summer, also thinking of the menu set up for that as well, that we're able to do both cold and the hot meal service. So again, that'll be a mixture. But I think for us, we're really focused on September 21, on the hope that we're able to return to some sort of normality and we're able to use the canteen, the school canteen again. And then those discussions that Judith had brought up earlier about delivering meals to classrooms and how well this has really went in a lot of schools. If you had asked us maybe a year ago, we would have told you we're not doing it because it won't work, it'll be chaos. And as Jayne had said, it's been the work and the dedication and the passion of the catering staff to really move towards that service. And they've been very adaptable, and we couldn't have done it without them.
All right, thank you, Jayne. If I can turn to you now, Judith made the point about not wanting to apply any pressure, but there is also the other point that it could be seen as a bit of an easier option not to provide hot meals when ideally the the best service would be to provide them. So how do you sort of strike that balance?
Well, first of all, you know, people who know me will know I've said this several times. Easier for who? Because making up 200 packed lunches is not easier than making up one big, you know, 200 portions of macaroni cheese, for instance. So if we're looking at the staff safety and some of that, then easier for who is the question. But this is absolutely is a partnership approach, and we need to be very mindful of the issues that Judith and Stephen have said about what works for individual schools, because no two schools are the same. Everyone, I think, also knows that I am an absolute proponent of hot, sustainable, freshly cooked and nutritious food. It is something I talk about all the time, and our aspiration in Scotland is to maximise that provision to as many children as possible. Now, with the rollout of free school meals to primary school pupils now taking place in Scotland from this coming August, we have a lot of work, but a lot of opportunity to provide those meals. And we also, as I've already said, have some significant changes coming in 4 weeks' time. So that focus on nutritious and healthy food for me is what's critical here, and it's the main thing we should be considering. So we need to be clear that we don't conflate two separate issues. Hot food is not always healthy or nutritious, and cold food does not need to be a sandwich. So the last time we returned to school, it was in the autumn. We were facing a long winter of disruption ahead. We're now heading into the spring and summer months. Our children and young people have been away from their schools for a long, long time. So whatever we offer, we need to make sure that it's nutritious, that it's attractive, and that it's good for them. And at this time of year, it doesn't always have to be hot. There has to be a balance there. What it does have to be is it has to be good and it has to be nutritious. So if there's one thing we've all learned from the media coverage over the past few months, is that there's something that's put together without care and without putting the child at the centre of it is just not going to cut it. So for me, I would much rather see beautiful salad pots, for instance, going to classrooms that should be reasonably straightforward to put together and a bit easier even than sandwiches at times, rather than, I don't know, chicken nuggets and smiley faces. So we need to be clear about the messages that we send as a kind of group of professionals. And for me, it's not hot food at any cost. It's about healthy, sustainable food that matters. So what we should be doing is focusing on seasonality. And in April, May and June, that absolutely includes grab and go options, more opportunity for them to get outside with their friends where we know the virus load is lower as well. So we should be spending time planning for that. We should be looking here at making the most of our outdoor spaces when the weather is good, as Stephen said, if we get that summer. We are masters of creativity, and I'd be thinking about how we can change our services this spring and summer to make the most of that. Let's not get hung up on whether it's hot. It's absolutely always going to be my preference, provided it's hot and nutritious.
All right, thank you. And Stephen Forster now. LACA has obviously sort of pinned its colours to the mast a little bit here with its Hottober campaign after the last lockdown, and you've now got Marching Back coming through now. Tell us your thoughts on this.
Absolutely. I'm absolutely, Jayne, 100% in agreement with that you've just said, and across sort of Wales and Northern Ireland. I think it is unacceptable for schools to step away from a hot meal service at any point. We absolutely are about providing that sustainable, hot, nutritious meal in the middle of the school day. We know that for many children, the hot school lunch may be the only hot meal that they receive. And therefore, it's absolutely vital that we get back to that being part of the school day and that whole piece. I recognise again, Jayne, you're quite right that you're coming into the summer months where there are additional choices made, but I think that it's unacceptable for a school to make a policy decision to move away from that hot meal provision in the middle of the day. Now, I guess that it's difficult to assess the numbers and so on with children and with sort of the way that we're doing sort of a different kind of blended service at the moment. But that again is, sort of where the caterers and the schools need to be working in a really strong partnership to make sure that on a daily basis and on a weekly basis, the right things are being done. Our service is about providing at the very sort of apex, the meal that is perhaps, as I said, the only meal that some children receive. Therefore, it's absolutely vital that it's hot, nutritious, and sustainable. and that we can be proud of anything that we're putting out and saying, well, actually, you know, sort of we take pride in feeding the children in every school that we all serve. So I think that we've, between us, all said that the commitment is to hot meals. I see no reason why a school shouldn't serve a hot meal, whether they've got classroom dining, whether they've got, you know, a different approach to service, but that there's a route around that in every instance. And Jane, you're quite right. It's, you know, easier for who is the question, because it certainly isn't easier to be doing, as you said, 200 pack meals. It's just not where we want to be. And that also is challenging for parents. We have to be mindful that we're also in that centre of that childhood obesity crisis, that children have been living on largely carb-based diets for the last year. And therefore, it's important that the choices we provide them in the middle of the school day also sort of got that breadth of provision. So, you know, and that a hot meal is sort of central to that.
Right, thank you very much. Now, I'm conscious that the time has moved on quite a bit. I did have another few questions I wanted to put, but also I want to make sure that we take some of the questions from participants. So I think maybe at this stage, I might sort of take a little jump now. We're going to talk to our colleague, Lucy Kent. Lucy, can I bring you in?
Hi, how you doing?
Hello. Right, now we've got, so Lucy, you are, if you could just introduce yourself to people here and tell us just a little bit about your involvement today.
Yeah, of course. So hi everyone, I'm Lucy. I'm head of key accounts at Kraft Heinz, and I predominantly look after our education sector. So really excited to be here today and to share a bit about what we've been doing through some of the questions, hopefully.
Right. Now, one of the questions that I've got here is sort of addressed to you as a supplier. How can you help the return to a full school meal service?
Yeah, I think there's probably a few ways that we can help as a supplier. So the first is through the quality of the food. The second through really supporting through the Heinz brand, which is a really familiar and well-known, loved brand. And thirdly, through supporting industry like yourselves and LACA and lobbying for hot school meals to get back on the menu. So firstly, kind of on the quality of the food, as per LACA's Hottober campaign, we obviously know how important that hot meals are to an improved diet. And Heinz beans can really contribute to that. So incredibly versatile in terms of, you know, the effective vegan protein, high in fiber, low in fat, salt, sugar, 1 of the 5 a day. So really good at ticking a lot of the catering boxes. And we're trying to also bring in a much more exciting way for children. So kind of working with companies such as ProVeg, who I know were on the LACA webinar a couple of weeks ago, to really bring more excitement to the menu with veggie recipes such as baked bean quesadillas or curries, to really bring the focus on quality meals that kids actually want to eat. In terms of brand perspective, I think, you know, as a supplier, I really recognise there are some nervousnesses from parents and children in returning to canteens. So we've been working really closely with our customers right now to make sure they can take advantage of the Heinz brand love and use that to reassure parents and children that whatever they've been eating at home, they can eat in school as well. So adding small changes such as menu branding or transforming the canteen to make it a bit more of a fun area for kids to socialise and have fun through the kind of Heinz educational packs we've been sharing and given out to over 600 schools last year. And I think thirdly, as we said, you know, really supporting initiatives such as LACA's Marching Back to School. Heinz can really also help support by raising awareness, encouraging schools and parents and caterers to have that hot meals conversation and really prioritise getting hot meals back on the menu as soon as possible.
All right, thank you. And just one other point here. A couple of the panelists have mentioned about the relationship with suppliers and how important that's been, especially when the lockdown that we've just been through was announced at such short notice. So, I mean, how important is it for you as a business that we get back to a full school meal service as soon as possible?
Yeah, it's really, really important for Heinz, and I think also total society. But like, to be completely candid, you know, our no added sugar beans are a big part of our education business, and with schools being closed and being vouchers being available or cold meals, that obviously has a big impact on our business. But I think aside from that, you know, Heinz are obviously big advocates for trying to improve like nutrition within schools. We've continued to donate, meals to Magic Breakfast, so 12 million meals over coronavirus. But we also want to help own and be responsible for the systemic change that needs to happen in food manufacturing to help improve the diets of the future generation. So I think it was on BBC News this morning, but a report by Cambridge Uni announced that, the sugar tax that was bought in 2018 hasn't reduced the number of sugary drinks being bought, but it has meant that the amount of drinks consumed have lower sugar content and lower calorie content, and it has a real material impact on what's being consumed by children. So we see providing healthy hot school meals as our opportunity to really make a difference to child nutrition.
All right, thank you very much. Let's turn now to some of the questions that we've got from participants. The first one I've got here is from Lee Taylor, who says they've returned to a hot food full menu, but the cost of doing that means the use of a great more disposable containers, with an impact obviously on cost and the environment. So his question is, when does the panel envisage a full return to dining room provision for all schools? And presumably this brings in the point that Judith was making about the popularity now of classroom dining. Judith, can you step in on this one?
Yeah, I think it's working with schools. At the end of the day, we do all want to reduce the amount of disposables that are being used. And where possible, that is, we are able to do that in some of the classroom situations. But at the moment, we've got to comply with the social distancing guidelines that we've got in the schools and in our kitchens. But hoping that come the summer term and when everything starts to settle down, we are able to reduce those substantially.
All right, thank you. Jayne, there's another question which is along similar lines, talking about some schools are only allowing cold offer grab bags as they don't want hot food served in the classroom. Is this a safety issue, and is this something you've come across?
I think we've all come across it at different points, and it goes back to the point Stephen and Judith made earlier about some of this being school led, and there are curtails there that we have to work within that we're not always necessarily comfortable with. But this goes back to us having those conversations and building those relationships with our schools. We need to get better at challenging and explaining and understanding what the concerns are, what are the issues. Now, we've heard of things like they don't want cabbage because of the smell it can make in the classroom after. That's fine, but we can have broccoli or something instead. So, we just need to get better at having those conversations if we're not already having them. There are opportunities to talk about it. And for those who have done it and done it really well, there are now excellent examples out there that we can take to schools and say, here's where it's working and here's what it looks like. The same with when it comes to the disposables issue as well, which is something, really close to my heart. It breaks my heart that we've done so well to remove so much plastic and disposable stuff from our schools, single-use plastics. But this is going to be a long-term solution for many children. It's going to be a long-term solution, certainly in Scotland, where we don't have dining space for everyone. So it's going to be in-class dining. I have a number of small schools who don't have dining spaces anyway, so in-class dining is always the option. So let's not reinvent the wheel. We don't always need to rely on disposables either. Yes, there needs to be some upfront investment to tackle that. But if this is something that we're going to have to look at, then we need to also be prepared to spend to deliver it properly, because all you're doing is spending it on disposables anyway.
Okay, thank you. Stephen Briggs, you mentioned earlier in some of the comments you made about the availability of space in schools to deliver food. Is the classroom dining much of an issue for you?
The classroom dining, the biggest issue of all is depending on, we're so reliant on our catering staff moving stuff, manual handling containers and trolleys and everything around different classrooms. It works better in more modern schools where there is access to lifts. but a lot of our older schools don't have that, and there's a lot of carrying up and down stairs and whatever. When we do hit a situation like that, the school principals have worked pretty well with us in most cases, where maybe a number of the older children, maybe sixth formers, prefects, whatever, will come and lift boxes and deliver to the classrooms for us, which has been a great help.
All right, thank you. And Stephen Forster, it'd be interesting to hear your views on this too.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of sort of the disposables, it's, you know, I would echo sort of Jayne's thought that if you look at sort of this being a longer term provision, there are ways of putting in some more sustainable options. And, you know, there are people like Harfield, and there are many other suppliers out there. So I've named Harfield as one of them, that are great at providing sort of reusable melamines and so on that can be lightweight enough to, you know, sort of children to handle, but that are sort of have got that level of sustainability there. That means that you're not just sort of spending threepence, fourpence, fivepence on a container that is used and then thrown immediately away in the bin. So I think that, you know, sort of if it's a longer term provision, it is worth looking at some investment in areas such as that. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Question now. This is from Neil Porter. He says, we know there has been a lot of scrutiny of meal parcels over the past few months. What is the panel's view on ensuring high standards of hot meal provision is maintained and promoted? Jayne, do you want to kick off on that one?
Yeah, couldn't agree more with you, Neil. I think there is going to be a lot of scrutiny when we go back, and we can expect that to happen, partly as a result of where we find ourselves, small p politically, around this. I've already said a couple of times we have significant changes happening in Scotland, and the compliance side of that is going to be very challenging for us, Neil. But we need to make sure that the quality of the meal that's going out to those pupils is as high as it can be. These are children who have been out of school for a long period of time. And even if they've been receiving other forms of support, be that cash payments, vouchers, or food parcels, they will be looking forward to getting back to their schools with their pals and having their lunch and having their favourite food in some circumstances. So we also have our duty to those children to make sure that we give them that. So that's about making sure that it's good quality, tasty food. I don't want to put anything, I certainly don't want any of my staff putting anything on a plate that they wouldn't be proud of. So for me, that's really important. We have an inspection regime in Scotland that I know no one else has in other parts of the UK. So, you know, we don't expect inspectors to be in schools soon, but there's always that in the back of your mind thinking, is this something that we would be proud to serve and be caught serving as well?
Thank you. Stephen Briggs, I'm not quite sure how the sort of the row about the quality of school food parcels played out in Northern Ireland, but what's your view now on being able to sort of promote and maintain, you know, the highest possible standards for hot school meals now that schools are fully reopened?
Yeah, well, first of all, with the free school meal boxes, our free school boxes actually went very well, and we're very pleased at how they went. I suppose at the end of the day, it depends the value going in. We give the value. If a school meal is £2.80 a day, then that's exactly the amount of food value that we put in each of the boxes. The suppliers were very good as well at providing that for us. The only problem we had for the free school meal boxes was distribution. It wasn't getting the staff to pack them or the goods, it was the distribution that tripped us up and continues to trip us up, but we get there in the end. Bringing children back to school for a quality meal. One thing that we're currently working on at the moment is we started back last October a menu masters group, and it is very much a range of chefs, cooks and unit caterer managers sit on the group. We're crafting menus for primary schools and also the post-primary schools, where we have a regime at the minute. I have 1,200 schools at the moment. Basically in the past, everybody done their own menu that was compliant. And what we're trying to do is to bring some sort of standardization into it, that we're confident that the quality of the food is meeting the nutritional standards going out to the schools. So our aim is, we're looking at September. We want the parents to open their apps on the 31st of August and see whether their child's going to take, but we need the wow factor in it, and we need to make sure we've got our product right.
All right, thank you very much. Stephen Forster, your views on not just maintaining the standards of hot meal provision, but promoting the quality of them too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that none of us want to do a bad meal. And I would say that on behalf of every school cook, there is no school cook that wants to deliver a bad meal. Therefore, we shouldn't be fearful of scrutiny in terms of sort of our services that we deliver. I think that we all have school food standards in one shape or another across all of our sort of nations. And we should absolutely be advocating that we stick to those standards. In terms of promoting the hot service, LACA have picked up on, and I think that Lucy, you mentioned the Hottober campaign, and we have launched a second campaign, Marching Back into School for hot school meals, and the materials for that are all available on the LACA website, and I would urge all of our members or anyone else to, if you're not a member, join and get access to them. But certainly to my partners in the devolved nations, we're more than happy to share those with you, because this then becomes more of a national campaign about the service. And if we've got some sort of joined up thinking between us, it can be tweaked for specific areas, but let's not reinvent the wheel, and let's have that national message going out there across all 4 nations. Would be my sort of thinking really on that. More than happy to share it, Jayne and Stephen, with you. Okay, thank you. Judith, is there anything in Wales that you're doing specifically to sort of promote the school meals as children return to, obviously, the children, parents, and so that teachers and head teachers are also aware of what you're doing?
We're not doing anything specifically as a nation, but obviously individual local authorities will be promoting their services to the schools. Just to highlight really, in terms of that, as a devolved nation, we've got our own healthy eating regulations, and things are slightly different, as I say, in Wales, because we've actually worked very closely with the Welsh Local Government Association, who monitors all of our menus and issue certificates of compliance for those menus, so parents are reassured that they are all meeting the healthy eating regulations.
All right, thank you. Now, someone wanted to take advantage of having the 4 of you here today to ask how much is spent per child on a meal, regardless of whether they're hot or cold. Can I just go around and get an answer from you, if indeed you've got one? Jayne.
Depends which school, depends where it is. I've got some schools that have pupil rolls of 1,400, where the cost per meal will be one thing, and I have other schools where I have a school roll of 4. So the cost per meal there is significantly different. So I wish it was one with a really straightforward answers, and it isn't. And the other thing that I'm always conscious about giving costs out like this is, we're not always comparing apples with apples. So do you want us to give a figure that's just our food costs, or food costs plus staff costs, or food costs plus staff plus all the other on costs? So it's not one that we can just give a very straightforward answer to, unfortunately, but one that I'm more than happy to take offline and discuss further. Okay, thank you. Stephen Briggs, you mentioned a figure. I believe it was £2.80 for meals. Is that a food cost?
No, it's not. That is the cost to the parent or the child. It's right. £2.60 for primary schools and £2.80 in post-primary. Okay, thank you. Judith, is the answer from you similar to the one that Jayne gave?
Yes, most definitely, because it is right across all local authorities, all schools and local authorities are all slightly different. And it isn't just, the cost of the food you've got to look at, it's the staffing costs and it's the overhead costs as well. So you can't give a true reflection of what would be an average or a standard cost.
No. I thank you for that. Stephen, I'm assuming that the response from you will be very similar, but I did have another question here, which you may or may not be able to shed some light on. Someone's asking about the percentage of schools that don't offer hot meals. Do you have any figures or data at all on that sort of thing?
I think, put me on the spot, David, why don't you? I think that I couldn't sort of give that as sort of an off the peg sort of response. Schools should be providing hot meals. There should be a hot meal provision in all schools, and we've got infant preschool meals in England, and there's a requirement to provide that. If you've got a pure infant school, well then that's easy. If you've got a primary school, again you've got infant provision there. So I need to go away and come back with a response for that, David.
No, I understand, and it's probably worth just making
the
point
too. Tiny percentage that would not be offering hot meals.
But for all participants today, if there are any questions that we either don't get to or they need some research, we can certainly do that and get some answers for you. But they obviously you won't get them today, but we will put them on the website when we post the recording of the webinar. We're sort of winding down towards the end of our time now, and there was a topic that I wanted to talk about, which is breakfast provision in schools. It's obviously not compulsory. I guess I want to know the panel's view on whether maybe it would be a good thing if it was, and if so, who should provide it? Judith, can I come to you first?
Yeah, in Wales, we've got Welsh Government's free breakfast scheme. So that is funded by the Welsh Government, and the funding is received into the local authorities via the revenue support grant. There's no legal requirement for schools to deliver a breakfast scheme, but it's available for all primary schools to opt into if they want to. And once they do opt into the scheme, they then have to comply with the guidelines. Anecdotal evidence is that it improves attendance, and that we can see that in our schools, and it also aids concentration. Across Wales, we've got an average take-up of 25% in each school for those children who are actually having breakfast.
Okay, thank you very much. Jayne, what's the situation in Scotland?
I think breakfast is invaluable, and we have the manifesto pledge to provide that free breakfast across Scotland by August 2022. Now, in Scotland, that breakfast provision will look very different to elsewhere in the UK because our food and nutrition standards are going to affect virtually every element of that breakfast service. So fruit juice, the type of bread, the type of spread, the type of toppings, even the cereal that's available will be governed by the amount of fibre, for instance, that's in it. So that there will be no one size fits all across the UK, I would imagine, when it comes to breakfast provision. For us, we need to think carefully about how we deliver that because it has that wider impact. For me, of course, I think the best way to deliver that is through the local authorities. That's a sustainable, long-term, straightforward way of doing it. The Scottish Poverty and Inequality Research Unit at Glasgow Caledonian University, in partnership with the Poverty and Inequality Commission and the Greggs Foundation, have recently published their research into piloting the breakfast cart approach in Scotland, which was very, very successful and has a whole myriad of positive features ranging from protecting dignity and choice, discretion for what they can have, flexibility as to how it operates, it's low cost, it's a low cost implementation model. So that's something we need to look at much further and learn from. One size doesn't fit all, much as it doesn't at lunchtime, but breakfast is something that we are going to be looking at very closely over the next few months in Scotland.
All right, thank you for that. Stephen Briggs, can I bring you in on this? Could you give us a little bit of a picture of the breakfast provision, if there is any, in Northern Ireland, and maybe what you might like to see if the political will was there?
Yeah, so first of all, if there is a breakfast service to be delivered in the schools and it is made compulsory, then I do believe the Education Authority, catering should be responsible for doing it. At the moment, I have a mixed bag of snakes out there. I have principals running the breakfast clubs themselves. I have the food is coming in maybe from a local supplier at zero cost. I have other schools out there where we're providing the labour, but we're not providing the food. And it's basically broken up all over the place. As Judith had said, it is not compulsory for us to have breakfast clubs out there. I think our, somebody had mentioned, I think 25%. I think ours is even lower than that. It hasn't really been it hasn't been something that has been really well promoted, and it's not being managed in the way that I thought it should have been. But absolutely, if we were to go down the breakfast club route, I think the best people placed to supply that would be the catering staff and the Education Authority, who would be able to do that.
Thank you very much for that. And Stephen Forster, if I can turn to you just to sort of wrap things up, your thoughts on breakfast.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall we believe that feeding children well in schools is vital, and that we shouldn't be getting into a sort of debate about whether it's breakfast or lunch. It should be ideally both that can be provided. But I would be aligning sort of provision with that is in Scotland and suggesting that whatever is provided, it should be aligned with the school food standards that apply to any of the nations. And therefore, sort of, it shouldn't just be that, sort of some toast and jam is provided. It's got to meet the standards that we say are vital in the middle of the day. Well, then they should be vital at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day as well. So all food in school should meet those standards. And we thank suppliers for where you've reformulated items. Lucy, the Heinz beans that you've reformulated to be low sugar, low salt. And that you're seeing much more mainstream in any event. So I think that what I would say is that we have currently got a LACA survey on breakfast provision live, and therefore, if you're a LACA member and you're able to put some entries into that survey, please go online and do that. It's due to close tomorrow, and we're sure that sort of there's a lot of evidence coming out in terms of where uptake works. Ideally, it would work via the school caterers, so that there's a joined up thinking around the service provision, and it's not something that is somebody doing something at one part of the day, somebody doing something at another part of the day. We do have an open line to government to discuss this and other items, and I'm really pleased that on the next LACA webinar, which is on the 24th of March, that Vicky Ford, the Minister of State from the Department for Education, is joining us on that webinar and giving us some of her time really to think and talk about the whole school meals provision piece. And certainly I think we'll be reflecting over the last year, but looking at her hopes for school food provision as we move forward beyond pandemic.
Well, that's good news. We'll look forward to that.
That's my plug for the LACA webinar there, David.
Well done. I'm afraid that has to be it for today. My thanks to Stephen Briggs, Judith Gregory, Jayne Jones and Stephen Forster, and to you for joining us. There will be a link to the full recording of this webinar available next week on the Public Sector Catering website. And we'll be back on March 25th with our next webinar in the Future of Your Service series, when we will be talking to Kath Dalmeny, Chief Executive of Sustain, the Alliance for Better Food and Farming, who will be talking about how the different parts of the public sector can collaborate to better effect. And a word of thanks to Lucy Kent, Head of Key Accounts Food Service UK for Kraft Heinz, and to Kraft Heinz themselves for their support for today's webinar. See you on March 25th. Goodbye.